The email arrived on a Wednesday. 7:42 p.m. I was at my desk reviewing a grant documentation package for a college in Vermont when my phone buzzed. I almost didn't look. I had 2 more files to get through, and I'd told myself I'd leave by 8. The subject line was blank. The sender address was something I didn't recognize, a string of letters and numbers at a free email provider. I opened it. Dr. Vance's grant files don't match the archives. The Accreditation Board is auditing. Someone needs to check the Manning Collection manuscripts. I read it 3 times. The first time I saw my brother's name and my stomach dropped. The second time I saw the word accreditation and my training kicked in. I knew what that meant, what kind of trouble that was. The third time I saw Manning Collection and my hands stopped moving on the keyboard. Just stopped. The Manning Collection was mine. I'd found those manuscripts in 2018 in the basement of Greenwood University's Millbrook Library. 3 boxes of 19th century medical research notes, patient case studies, surgical diagrams, uncatalogued, untouched for maybe 60 years. I spent 4 months accessioning them, creating finding aids, digitizing the fragile pages. It was the work that made my career, and then it was the work that ended it. I hadn't spoken to my brother Damian in 5 years. Not since February 2020. Not since the day 2 security officers walked me out of the archives on the 3rd floor of Millbrook while students in the reading room pretended not to watch. Damian was the dean of research at Greenwood now, youngest dean in the university's history. They'd given him the title 2 years after I left. His faculty photo was still on the university website, the same smile he'd had since we were kids, the one that made everyone trust him. I closed the email, opened it again, forwarded it to my personal account. Then I deleted it from my work inbox and sat there with the screen glow on my face. The fluorescent lights in my office hummed the way they always did. I'd meant to get them fixed. I looked around the room. My diploma from Simmons on the wall. The certificate from the New England Association of Schools and Colleges, the Accreditation Board, naming Vance Research Archives as a recommended vendor for grant documentation verification. That had come in 2022. I'd framed it and hung it next to my degree. Nobody in Greenwood knew what I'd built. My office was 12 blocks from the university where I used to work, and they had no idea. I thought about deleting the email again, pretending I never saw it, letting the Accreditation Board do what accreditation boards do. It wasn't my problem. It hadn't been my problem since the day security walked me out, but the Manning Collection. I knew exactly which manuscripts the email meant. I knew their accession numbers. I knew the date stamps on their pages, 1847 through 1892. I knew the surgeon's name on the first box, Dr. Edmund Hartley, who'd practiced at Massachusetts General and kept meticulous notes on infection rates before anyone understood germ theory. Damian had never set foot in the basement of Millbrook Library. Not once. I'd told him about the collection over dinner at his house. January 2018. I was excited. He'd asked to see my research notes. 6 months later, he submitted his first NIH grant citing previously uncatalogued 19th century surgical manuscripts as foundational research. He listed himself as the primary researcher. I didn't find out until December 2019. I was searching the university's grant database for a completely different reason. A graduate student had asked about funding sources for her dissertation, and Damian's name came up attached to the Manning Collection. And then another grant. And then a third. By the time I confronted him, he'd secured $2.1 million. By the time he fired me, it was $3.4 million. He told me I was a librarian. He said I catalogued things. He said cataloging wasn't research. The thing about archives is that everything leaves a record. Every time a manuscript is handled, every time a file is accessed, every time a document moves from one pair of hands to another, the system logs it. The system doesn't forget. The system keeps better notes than people do. I didn't know yet what I was going to find when I started pulling those records. I didn't know about the other grants, the other manuscripts, the $4.7 million total that would surface in the accreditation report 3 weeks later. I didn't know my brother would show up at my office door asking for my help. That Wednesday night, I sat at my desk and stared at an anonymous email and tried to decide whether to get involved. I think I already knew the answer. I think I'd known since the day I left Greenwood's campus with a cardboard box of my personal things and nowhere to go. I just wasn't ready to admit it yet. The morning after the email, I got to the office at 7:15. My routine was the same every day. Coffee from the machine in the break room, the bad kind, the kind that tastes like the pot hasn't been washed since 2019. I drank it anyway, checked my calendar. 3 client calls and a site visit to a college in Worcester that afternoon. Nothing about my brother, nothing about the Manning collection. I should have been able to focus. I had work to do. Real work. Paid work. Vance Research Archives had 6 employees, now 6 people who depended on me to run the business I'd built from nothing. We handled grant documentation verification for 14 colleges and 2 medical research foundations across New England. We were small, but we were good. The kind of good that comes from caring about details most people think don't matter. When I started the firm in June 2020, I worked from my apartment. I had one client, a community college in Springfield that needed help organizing 50 years of accreditation records. I sat on my living room floor with stacks of paper spread out around me like a weird archaeological dig. My cat at the time, a calico named Mabel, kept trying to sleep on the grant files. Mabel died in 2023. I still missed that cat. By 2022, we'd grown enough that I leased the office on Court Street. Exposed brick wall on one side. Big windows that got good light in the mornings. I hired my first employee, a recent Simmons graduate named Priya who reminded me of myself at 24, too serious, too careful, the kind of person who double-checks everything. The NEASC recommended vendor status came in March 2022. That was the thing that changed everything. The Accreditation Board had reviewed our work on 6 different institutional audits and found 0 errors. 0. In this field, that basically never happens. I remember getting the letter. I remember sitting at my desk holding it and thinking, the same board that oversees Greenwood University's accreditation just certified my firm as the gold standard. I didn't tell anyone in my family. There wasn't anyone to tell. My mother died when I was 12. Damian had stopped being family in 2020. My father had left when I was 3 and I had no memory of him at all. So I framed the certificate and hung it on my wall and went back to work. That was the thing about the last 5 years. I'd built something real. Something that existed independent of Damian, independent of Greenwood, independent of the girl who'd been walked out of Millbrook Library by security guards. I wasn't that person anymore, and I had the bank statements and the client list and the framed certificate to prove it. But the Manning collection. Those manuscripts had been my first real discovery. The kind of find that archivists talk about at conferences. The kind that makes a career. I found them on a Thursday in March 2018. I was 25, 2 years into my job at Greenwood, and I'd been assigned to clear out a storage room in the sub-basement of Millbrook Library. The room hadn't been opened in decades. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of old paper and something sharper underneath, mold, maybe, or just the smell of things left too long in the dark. There were boxes everywhere. Cardboard boxes with labels written in fountain pen. Wooden crates with brass hinges. Metal filing cabinets shoved against the walls. Most of it was junk, old course catalogs from the 1960s, financial records from a dean who'd retired before I was born. And then I opened a wooden crate marked Hartley Estate, 1947. Inside, 3 archival boxes. Inside those, hundreds of pages of handwritten medical notes. Case studies, surgical diagrams in ink so precise they looked printed. Pages dated from 1847 to 1892. The name on the first box was Dr. Edmund Hartley, Massachusetts General Hospital. I sat on the floor of that basement and read for 2 hours. I forgot about lunch. I forgot about the other boxes I was supposed to be sorting. I just read. Hartley had been tracking infection rates in surgical patients decades before Joseph, Lister's antiseptic methods became standard practice. His notes showed he'd figured out, through pure observation, through years of meticulous record-keeping, that surgeons who washed their hands between patients lost fewer of them to post-surgical fever. He was 20 years ahead of the medical establishment, and nobody knew because his research had been sitting in a crate in a basement since his death in 1902. This was important. This was publishable. This was the kind of discovery that got attention from medical historians and research institutions. I told Damian about it over dinner at his house in January 2018. No, wait, it was definitely 2018. March. I found them in March, I told him a few weeks later. I always mix up the timeline in my head. Anyway, dinner. His wife Carla had made lasagna. Their kids were upstairs doing homework. Damian asked about work and I told him about the Hartley collection. I was excited. I talked too fast. I probably sounded like a kid showing off a science fair project. He asked to see my research notes. He said he might be able to help. He knew people in the medical humanities department who'd be interested. He was the associate dean of research then, not the dean yet. That promotion came later after the grants. I gave him copies of everything, my finding aids, my preliminary analysis, my cataloging notes with accession numbers and date ranges. I thought he was being helpful. 6 months later, he submitted his first NIH grant. I didn't find out until December 2019, almost a full year after the first grant went through. I was searching the university's internal grant database for a graduate student who needed funding sources for her dissertation on Civil War-era medical practices. A routine search. The kind of thing I did all the time. Damian's name appeared in the search results. Attached to a grant I didn't know about, then a second grant, then a third. All three cited the Hartley manuscripts as foundational research. All three listed Dr. Damian Vance as the primary researcher who discovered and catalogued the collection. My hands were cold, I remember that. The computer lab was warm, the heat was always too high in Millbrook, but my hands were cold. I pulled more records. I found the grant applications. I found the progress reports. I found the budget justifications and the research narratives. Damian had copied entire paragraphs from my finding aids. He'd listed my accession numbers. He'd used my organizational schema. The only thing he hadn't used was my name. I printed everything. I don't know why I printed it. Maybe I thought I needed to hold it to feel the weight of it in my hands. But I printed all of it, 247 pages. I put them in a folder and I drove to Damian's office in the administration building. It was January 10, 2020. A Friday. Cold, the way Massachusetts is cold in January, the kind of cold that gets into your bones and stays there. I walked into his office without knocking. His assistant tried to stop me, but I was already through the door. Damian was on the phone. He looked up at me, held up one finger, the universal signal for give me a minute. I didn't give him a minute. I dropped the folder on his desk. He ended his call, looked at the folder, looked at me. What's this? Your grants, I said. The Hartley manuscripts. 3 NIH grants totaling $2.1 million. You listed yourself as primary researcher. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he leaned back in his chair. The chair creaked. You're a librarian, Elara. You catalog things. Catalog, that's not research. I found them. I analyzed them. I wrote the finding aids you copied. You processed a collection. I saw the research potential. That's what researchers do, they see potential. His voice was calm. The same calm he'd used when I was 12 and our mother died, and he told me everything was going to be fine. I elevated your work. You should be thanking me. I stared at him. The radiator in his office clicked and hummed. You're going to withdraw the grants, I said. You're going to tell the NIH you made an error in attribution. No, he stood up. He was taller than me. He'd always been taller. I'm not going to do that, and you're not going to say anything. Because if you do, I'll have to report your mishandling of rare materials to the university librarian. Mishandling. You took research materials out of the archives without authorization. You gave copies of uncatalogued manuscripts to an unaffiliated third party." He smiled. It was almost sad, that smile. "That third party would be me, Elara. You gave me the materials. You didn't follow proper channels. That's a terminable offense." He'd planned this. Maybe not from the beginning. I don't think he was that calculated, not at the start. But somewhere along the way, he'd prepared for this conversation. He'd built a trap and I'd walked right into it. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I picked up my folder and I walked out of his office and I drove home and I sat in my apartment with the heat off because I couldn't afford to run it and my hands were still cold. 3 weeks later, on February 3, 2 security officers arrived at the archives reading room. They told me to pack my personal belongings. They said I was being terminated for mishandling rare materials. They said the university librarian had signed off on it. Damian had filed the complaint the day after I confronted him. He'd told them I'd removed original manuscripts from the archives and shared them without authorization. The manuscripts in question were the Hartley collection, the ones I'd found, the ones I'd catalogued, the ones I'd spent 4 months of my life preserving. The students in the reading room watched as the officers walked me to the elevator. I was holding a cardboard box with my coffee mug and my plant and the framed photo of my mother. The elevator doors closed and I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 3 weeks. I didn't fight it. I didn't appeal. I didn't contact a lawyer or file a complaint with the provost's office. I was 27 years old and I'd just lost everything and I didn't have the money or the energy or the belief that anyone would take my word over Damian's. He was the associate dean of research. I was a librarian who catalogued things. But I kept everything. The printed grant applications, the finding aids I'd written, the email where he'd asked to see my research notes, the accession logs with my name and the date stamps, the server records showing I'd accessed the Hartley manuscripts for the first time in March 2018, 6 months before Damian's first grant application. I kept it all in a locked file box in the back of my closet. I told myself it was for the record, in case someone ever asked. In case the truth ever mattered. For 5 years, nobody asked. Then an anonymous email arrived on a Wednesday at 7:42 p.m., and suddenly the truth mattered again. I replied to the email the next morning. Short, 3 sentences. I said I'd look into it and asked if they'd be willing to meet. The reply came back in 20 minutes. Just a time and a place. The Stacks Cafe, Thursday, 3 p.m. The Stacks was a coffee shop 2 blocks from campus. Brick walls lined with bookshelves, mismatched chairs. The kind of place where graduate students camped out with laptops and cold coffee for entire afternoons. I'd spent a lot of hours there when I worked at Greenwood. Not since. I got there early on Thursday. Ordered tea, sat at a table near the back where I could see the door. The tea was too hot to drink, and I let it sit there steaming while I watched students come and go with their backpacks and their headphones and their faces that looked younger every year. At exactly 3 p.m., a young woman walked in and stood by the counter looking around like she wasn't sure she was in the right place. She was maybe 25, 26. Dark hair pulled back in a clip, glasses that kept sliding down her nose. She was holding a manila envelope against her chest with both hands. She saw me watching her and walked over. "Ms. Vance." "Callie." She nodded and sat down across from me. She put the envelope on the table but kept one hand on it like someone might try to take it. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. "I wasn't sure I didn't know if you'd want to get involved." I almost didn't reply. "But you did." "But I did." She let out a breath. The kind of breath you let out when you've been holding something in for too long. "I'm a PhD candidate in the history department," she said. "My dissertation is on 19th century surgical practices in New England. I've been doing research in the university archives for 2 years, and about 6 months ago, I kept running into these references in the grant database. These grants that cited a collection I couldn't find in the regular catalog. The Hartley manuscripts." "Yeah," she looked surprised. "You know about them. They're the reason I don't work there anymore." She was quiet for a moment. The coffee machine behind the counter made a hissing sound. Someone's laptop played a notification chime. "I started digging," she said. "I pulled the grant applications from the NIH public database. 7 grants over 6 years. All of them cite the Hartley manuscripts as primary source material. All of them list Dr. Damian Vance as the researcher who discovered and cataloged the collection." She opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of papers. Grant applications, progress reports, research narratives, pages with sections highlighted in yellow. But when I went to look at the actual manuscripts in the archives, I found the original accession records, the finding aids, the cataloging notes. She looked at me. "Your name is on all of them, your signature. The date stamps are from March through June 2018, and the first grant application." She flipped to a page in her stack. "June 10, 2018. That's 3 months after you started cataloging. He submitted the grant before you'd even finished the finding aids." I picked up one of the pages. Damian's signature at the bottom. The date. The list of research materials. Hartley Surgical Casebooks, 1847-1892, Greenwood University Special Collections. Catalogued and analyzed by primary researcher Dr. Damian Vance. He'd written catalogued and analyzed by. Not discovered by Elara Vance, university archivist. Not processed by the library staff. Just his name, like I didn't exist. "He built his whole research portfolio on your work," Callie said. 7 grants, $4.7 million, and he never once mentioned your name in any of the documentation. I put the page down. "Why are you telling me this?" She looked down at her hands. "Because I reported it to the Accreditation Board. The NEASC is doing a routine review of Greenwood's research programs this fall, and I sent them what I found. Anonymously. And now you're scared. I have 2 years left on my dissertation. If Damian finds out I'm the one who reported him, he could." She trailed off, adjusted her glasses. "He's the dean of research. He signs off on every dissertation committee in the history department. He could end my career before it starts." "But you're telling me anyway." "You lost your job over this. You lost 5 years of a career you should have had. I thought you should know what I found. I thought. Maybe you'd want to do something with it." I looked at the stack of papers on the table between us. The highlighted sections, the dates, the names. She'd done good work. Careful work. The kind of work that takes time and patience, and the willingness to follow a trail even when it leads somewhere you don't want to go. "Can I keep these?" She nodded. "I made you copies." "Thank you, Callie." Is he going to find out it was me? I thought about it, about Damian's careful smile and his calm voice and the way he'd built a trap for me 5 years ago without me ever seeing it coming. "Not if I can help it," I said. She left first. I stayed at the table with the cold tea and the stack of papers and the weight of everything I'd tried to leave behind for 5 years. Damian found out about the audit 3 days later. I know because Callie emailed me. She said he'd called an emergency faculty meeting. She said he'd stood in front of the entire research faculty and called the audit a routine administrative review that some disgruntled former employees are trying to exploit. Former employees, plural. He didn't name me. He didn't have to, but that wasn't what got my attention. The day after the faculty meeting, Callie sent me another message. Short, 3 words. "They accessed my account." I called her immediately. Her voice was shaking. "I got a notification from the university IT system last night. Someone with administrative privileges accessed my research folder on the shared server. They looked at my dissertation files, my grant database search history, my email correspondence with the NEASC. Did they change anything?" "I don't think so, but they saw everything. They know what I sent to the Accreditation Board. They know I've been looking into the Hartley grants." My mouth was dry. The radiator in my office clicked on that sound, that particular clicking sound that meant the heat was finally working. I'd been meaning to call the landlord about it. Did you talk to anyone in it? I tried. They said it was a routine server maintenance review, but the timestamp on the access log is 11:47 p.m. on a Saturday night. That's not routine maintenance. That's someone who didn't want anyone to notice. Damian was trying to find out who'd talked to the accreditation board. He was trying to find out what they knew. And if he found the original access logs, the ones that showed who actually handled the Hartley manuscripts and when he'd try to destroy those too. That was his mistake, because I still had the originals. The accession logs with my signature and the March 2018 date stamps. The email where he'd asked to see my research notes. And now, thanks to Callie, I had his grant applications with his signature claiming credit for work he never did. I also knew someone Damian had forgotten about. Someone who'd left Greenwood the same year I did. Someone who'd been the archives assistant and had helped me with the Hartley cataloging. Her name was Miriam Reyes, and Miriam was the kind of person who backed up everything. I called Miriam that night. She picked up on the second ring. Elara Vance. I was wondering when you'd call. Miriam Reyes had been the archives assistant at Greenwood for 11 years before she left in 2020. She was in her early 40s now, working at the Boston Public Library in their Special Collections Division. She'd been my favorite person at Greenwood, the kind of colleague who remembered your birthday and knew how to fix the microfilm reader and never once tried to take credit for work she didn't do. I heard about the audit, she said. A friend still in the history department told me. Damian's losing his mind. He's trying to access the old archive servers. I figured. That's why I kept the logs. My throat tightened. You kept them. I backed up the server access logs every month, 2018 through 2020. Every login, every file access, every document request. The IT department did a system migration in 2021, and they deleted the old logs as part of the cleanup. But I had copies. I closed my eyes. The hum of the fluorescent lights in my office suddenly sounded like the most beautiful noise in the world. Funny how that works. Why? I asked. Because I watched what he did to you, and I knew someday someone would need proof. She paused. Also, I'm a librarian, we keep things. We both laughed. It was the kind of laugh that doesn't have much humor in it. The kind that's mostly just recognition. Two people who have seen the same thing and know they saw it. I need those logs, Miriam. I know. I already pulled them. They show every time you access the Hartley manuscripts. Every time Damian accessed the grant database. The dates, the times, the IP addresses, it's all there. She emailed me the files that night. 47 pages of server logs, timestamps, user IDs, file paths. To most people it would look like gibberish. To me it was a map of the truth. I spent the next 2 days organizing the evidence. I pulled out the locked file box from the back of my closet, the one I'd been keeping for 5 years. The printed grant applications. The finding aids with my signature. The accession logs with the March 2018 date stamps. The email from Damian asking to see my research notes, dated March 27, 2018 at 4:15 p.m. Then Callie's research. 7 NIH grants. June 2018 through March 2024, all listing Damian as primary researcher. All built on the Hartley manuscripts. Total, $4.7 million, and now Miriam's server logs, showing that the first time Damian Vance's user ID accessed the Hartley manuscript files in the university system was June 2018, 3 months after the manuscripts had already been catalogued under my name. The evidence was complete. Undeniable. The kind of paper trail that doesn't leave room for argument. On Wednesday morning, October 22, I got a call from Dr. Samuel Ackhaffer. He was the lead investigator for the NEASC accreditation review. His voice on the phone was calm and careful and completely unreadable, the voice of someone who's spent decades asking questions where the answers matter. Ms. Vance, I understand you've been in contact with one of our whistleblowers. I have. And I understand. You have documentation related to the grant applications under review. I do. There was a pause. I heard papers shuffling in the background. The university has raised concerns about the credibility of the information we've received. They've suggested the complaint came from a former employee with a personal grudge. They've asked us to dismiss it as a personnel dispute rather than a research integrity matter. My hand tightened on the phone. They're saying I'm making it up. I'm not saying that, Ms. Vance. I'm telling you what the university's position is. And I'm telling you that, at this point, the testimony of one graduate student and one former employee is not enough for the board to issue a finding of research misconduct. I stared at the evidence spread across my desk. The finding aids, the grant applications, the server logs, the emails, 47 pages of server timestamps, 5 years of silence in a locked box. What if I had more than testimony? I said, what kind of more? Original documents, accession logs with date stamps and signatures, server access records showing exactly who handled which files and when, grant applications where the primary researcher claims to have catalogued manuscripts that were already catalogued under someone else's name 3 months earlier. Another pause, longer this time. MS. Vance, if you have documentation that establishes a clear chain of custody for those manuscripts, documentation that contradicts the representations made in the grant applications, that would change the board's assessment. I have it. Can you send it to me? I can bring it to you. I drove to the NEASC offices in Burlington that afternoon, 2.5 hours each way. I listened to the radio for the first hour, and then I turned it off and drove in silence because I needed to think. The NEASC building was a plain brick office park off the highway. Dr. Ackhaffer met me in a small conference room on the 2nd floor. He was tall, African-American, maybe 50, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the kind of stillness that comes from spending years in rooms where people are trying to hide things. I placed the evidence on the table between us. Folder by folder. I'd organized everything chronologically, a timeline you could follow from beginning to end. This is the original finding aid for the Hartley collection, I said, sliding the first folder across the table. Completed June 2018. My signature, my accession numbers. The date stamps show the manuscripts were processed between March and June of that year. He opened the folder, studied the pages. His face gave nothing away. These are the grant applications, I said. 7 grants. The first one submitted June 10, 2018, before I'd even finished the finding aid. All of them claim Dr. Damian Vance as the researcher who discovered and catalogued the Hartley manuscripts. He looked at the signatures, the dates, the list of research materials. These are the server access logs, I said, placing the 3rd folder on the table. From Greenwood's own IT system, they show the first time Damian Vance's user ID accessed the Hartley manuscript files was June 2018. My user ID shows access beginning in March 2018 and continuing through June. The timestamps don't match his story. Dr. Ackhaffer removed his reading glasses from his forehead and put them on. He read the server logs for a long time. Where did you get these? From the archives assistant, who backed them up before the university deleted them during a system migration. He nodded slowly, not a nod of agreement, a nod of someone who's been doing this work long enough to recognize when a case has just gotten significantly stronger. The board will need to verify all of this independently. I understand. This will be in the preliminary report. The university will have an opportunity to respond. I understand that too. He closed the last folder and looked at me. Ms. Vance, I want to be direct with you. If these documents are authenticated by our forensic team, and I have to say, they appear to be exactly what they claim to be, this is going to have serious consequences for your brother, for the university. Probably for you as well. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the cardboard box I'd carried out of Millbrook Library, the plant I'd dropped in the elevator, the way the students had pretended not to watch. "I've been prepared for 5 years," I said. I drove back to Greenwood that evening. The sun was setting over the highway and the sky was that particular shade of orange you only get in October in New England. I stopped at a rest area to get coffee from a vending machine. It was terrible. The worst coffee I've ever had. I drank the whole thing. The evidence was out of my hands now. The board would investigate. The report would come. Whatever happened next, I'd done what I could. I had the evidence. The board had the evidence. Now we waited. I didn't know yet that Damian would show up at my office door 4 days later, asking for my help. The morning of October 29, I woke up at 4:37 a.m. and couldn't go back to sleep. This happens to me sometimes. My brain decides it's done resting and that's that. I've learned not to fight it. I got up. Made coffee, the good kind, from the French press I keep for mornings when I need something better than the office machine. I stood at the kitchen window and watched the sky change from black to gray to pale pink over the rooftops of downtown Greenwood. The NEASC board was releasing its preliminary findings. At 10 a.m. Dr. Ackhaffer had called the day before to tell me. "The report will be posted on the board's public website," he'd said. "The university will receive it simultaneously. I want you to be aware that once it's public, things will move quickly." Today was Wednesday. In 3 hours, everything I'd been holding for 5 years would be out in the open. I thought about my mother that morning, Catherine Vance. She died when I was 12, ovarian cancer, 6 months from diagnosis to the end. Damian was 18, about to start college. After she died, he became my legal guardian. He deferred his freshman year at Greenwood to take care of me. He worked at a grocery store and made sure I got to school and helped me with my homework at the kitchen table while he studied for the classes he wasn't taking yet. That was the Damian I remembered from before. The one who stayed. The one who put his life on hold for a 12-year-old sister who didn't understand why her mother wasn't coming home. I don't know when that person disappeared. I don't know if he disappeared all at once or if he faded out gradually, like a photograph left in the sun. But the man who sat in his office on January 10, 2020, and told me I was just a librarian, that man wasn't the brother who'd raised me. Or maybe he was. Maybe people are both things. Maybe the person who takes care of you can also be the person who destroys you. I still don't have a good answer for that. At 9:45, I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. My hands were doing that thing they do when I haven't slept enough, a slight tremor, like my body was vibrating at a frequency only I could feel. At 10:02, I refreshed the NEASC website. The report was there. 17 pages. I read it once. Then I read it again. The preliminary findings were organized into 4 sections. The first section summarized the scope of the investigation, a routine accreditation review of Greenwood University's research programs, conducted between October 8 and October 28, 2025. The second section detailed the whistleblower complaint. A graduate student had identified discrepancies between the research attributed to Dr. Damian Vance in 7 NIH grant applications and the actual archival records held by the university library. The third section was the findings. The board had authenticated the original finding aids for the Hartley surgical casebooks, dated March through June 2018, bearing the signature and accession stamps of archivist Elara Vance. The board had authenticated university server access logs, showing Elara Vance's user ID accessing the Hartley manuscript files beginning March 15, 2018. The board had authenticated 7 grant applications, submitted between June 2018 and March 2024, in which Dr. Damian Vance claimed to have discovered and catalogued the same manuscripts, 3 months after they had already been catalogued under another archivist's name. The language was careful, institutional. The words research misconduct appeared on page 11 in a paragraph that noted Dr. Vance's grant applications contained material misrepresentations regarding the provenance of primary source materials, specifically the attribution of archival discovery and cataloging work performed by another researcher. The words $4.7 million appeared on page 13. Total NIH funding across 7 grants, 2018 through 2024. The words accreditation probation appeared on page 15. The board recommended that Greenwood University be placed on probationary status pending a full review of its research oversight procedures. The 4th section was the university's response, submitted on October 25. Greenwood had reviewed the board's evidence and determined that Dr. Damian Vance would be suspended from his position as Dean of Research, effective immediately, pending a full internal investigation. I sat at my desk for a long time after I finished reading. The fluorescent lights hummed. The radiator clicked. Outside my window, Court Street looked the same as it always did, cars parked along the curb, students walking to campus with their backpacks, the gray October sky hanging low over the rooftops. Everything was different and nothing looked different. My phone buzzed. A text from Callie. I saw the report. I'm shaking. Is this real? I typed back, it's real. Then another text. From Miriam. Page 11, under the authentication section. They cited my server logs as verified evidence. I'm going to frame this report. I laughed. I don't know why I laughed. It wasn't funny, not really. But Miriam was going to frame the accreditation report that proved my brother committed research fraud. Some things are so strange you can't do anything else. The university sent out a campus-wide email at 2:14 p.m. Dr. Damian Vance had been placed on administrative leave. An interim dean would be appointed within the week. All 7 NIH grants were frozen pending reevaluation. The university was cooperating fully with the NEASC review. I read the email 3 times. Damian wasn't just suspended. His grants were frozen. His research portfolio, everything he'd built over the last 7 years, was under investigation. The youngest dean in Greenwood's history was now the subject of a misconduct finding by the same accreditation board that had certified my firm as the gold standard. I didn't feel what I thought I would feel. I thought there would be something bigger, a rush of vindication, a sense of justice, maybe even some kind of peace. What I felt was tired. The good kind of tired, the kind you feel after you've been carrying something heavy for a long time and you finally set it down, but still tired. The report was public, the truth was out, the record was corrected, and the hardest part hadn't started yet. Damian came to my office the next day. Thursday, October 30. I was at my desk going through a documentation package for a client in Rhode Island when I heard the front door open. My assistant Priya's voice, saying something I couldn't make out, then footsteps in the hallway. He stopped in the doorway of my office. He looked different than the last time I'd seen him. That had been across a crowded room at a university function 2 years ago. I'd been there as a vendor and he'd walked past me without recognizing me or pretending not to. But this was different. He looked smaller. The skin around his eyes was dark. His collar was unbuttoned. Elara. Damian. He stood there for a moment. The radiator in my office clicked on. Priya appeared behind him with a look on her face that said she'd be happy to call security if I needed it. I shook my head slightly and she backed away. Can I sit down? I nodded at the chair across from my desk. The same chair where clients sat when they were hiring me to fix their documentation problems. He sat down heavily, like his body weighed more than it used to. I saw the report, I said. Everyone saw the report. He looked around my office, at the diploma on the wall, at the NEASC certificate, at the exposed brick and the big windows and the 6 employee desks in the main room behind him. You built all of this. Over 5 years, yes. I didn't know. You didn't ask. He flinched. It was small, almost invisible, but I saw it. The university needs someone to verify the grant documentation for the accreditation appeal, he said. The board is requiring an independent audit of all 7 grants. The corrected filings have to be submitted within 60 days, or the probation becomes a revocation. I know how accreditation probation works. Then you know why I'm here. He leaned forward. You're the only person who has the original materials, the accession logs, the finding aids. Without those, we can't prove which research is actually attributable to which researcher. The whole research program could lose its accreditation. I said. What? You said we can't prove. There is no we. He stared at me. The clock on my desk said 3:17 p.m. outside the window. A delivery truck beeped as it backed into the alley behind the building. I'm not going to apologize for what I did, he said. I know that's what you want to hear. But I've been suspended from my job, and my grants are frozen, and my career is probably over. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm sorry when we both know I did what I thought I had to do at the time. I didn't say anything, but the university didn't do this. The graduate students who depend on those research grants didn't do this. The faculty in the medical humanities department who built their work on those funding streams didn't do this. They're going to lose everything if the accreditation gets revoked, and you're the only one who can help them. I looked at him, at the brother who'd raised me, at the man who'd destroyed my career and told me I should thank him for it. You're asking me to save the institution that fired me. Using the documents I preserved, because I knew someday this would happen. Yes. And you're not going to apologize. No. I sat with that for a moment. The radiator hummed. Someone's phone buzzed in the main room. The university can contract my firm at the standard rate, I said. Full access to all grant records, full credit for my original work in every corrected filing. I name my team. I set the timeline. And the contract comes directly to me, not through your office. You want me to hire the sister I fired to audit my own research. I want the university to hire the best archival consultancy in New England to fix a documentation crisis. That's not personal. That's just good business. He looked at me for a long moment. I couldn't read his face. Maybe I never could. I'll tell the provost, he said. He stood up, walked to the door, stopped. For what it's worth, he said, you were right about the manuscripts, about the research. You were right about all of it. I know. He left. The front door closed behind him. Priya appeared in my doorway with her eyebrows raised. Was that? Yes. Is everything okay? I looked at the NEASC certificate on my wall, at the diploma next to it, at the evidence box still sitting on the corner of my desk with 5 years of proof inside. Yeah, I said. I think it actually is. The university called on Monday, November 3. The provost's office. Very formal, very professional. They wanted to engage Vance Research Archives for grant documentation verification services. They'd reviewed our credentials and determined we were the best qualified firm for the work. I'm sure Damian hadn't mentioned that I used to work there, or that the credentials they were reviewing had been built during a 5-year exile that started when 2 security officers walked me out of the building where I now held the keys to their accreditation survival. I sent them a contract that afternoon. Full access to all records. Credit for original work in all corrected filings. A project timeline I controlled, and my standard consulting fee, which was $285 an hour. They signed it the next day. I waited. I waited through the contract signing. I waited through the first project meeting with the interim dean. I waited through the first batch of corrected filings and the first round of board questions, and the first time I had to explain to a room full of university administrators that the archivist they'd fired in 2020 was now the person saving their research programs. I waited. I was good at waiting. And then on Monday, November 10, I finished the last corrected filing and sent it to the NEASC board. The accreditation appeal was complete. The documentation was clean. The record was accurate. I walked out of my office and down Court Street and across the campus of Greenwood University. It was cold. November in Massachusetts, the kind of cold that makes your face numb and your breath visible in the air. The trees along the main quad were bare, their branches dark against a pale gray sky. Students hurried past with their heads down, their scarves pulled tight. I walked past the administration building where Damian's office was. Past the humanities building where Callie Tran was probably sitting in a seminar room right now, taking notes for her dissertation, the dissertation she'd be able to finish now, without worrying about retaliation from a dean who no longer had the power to hurt her. I walked past Millbrook Library, the same building where I'd spent the best years of my career. The same doors I'd walked through every morning for 6 years. The same third-floor windows where the archives reading room looked out over the quad. I stopped on the sidewalk and looked up at those windows. The lights were on. Someone was in there. Another archivist, maybe, cataloging a new collection. Or a graduate student bent over a set of manuscripts, discovering something nobody had seen in decades. I stood there for a long time, just breathing. The cold air in my lungs, the sound of the wind in the bare branches, a squirrel running across the quad with something in its mouth, an acorn, maybe, or a piece of someone's lunch. 5 years ago, I'd walked out of that building holding a cardboard box. I'd lost my job and my career and my brother all in the same month. I was 27 years old and I didn't know what came next. Now I was standing on the same sidewalk looking at the same building, and I knew exactly what came next. I was going to walk back to my office. I was going to open my laptop. I was going to return 16 emails from colleges and foundations that needed my firm's help. And then I was going to go home and make dinner and feed my cat and go to bed. I didn't need the university's approval. I didn't need my brother's apology. I didn't need anyone to tell me I was right. The record was corrected. The truth was on file. The system had done what systems do when you give them the right information. I turned away from the library and walked toward the parking lot. Past the students, past the bare trees, past everything I used to think I needed. The wind was cold, but I didn't hurry. Some things you don't rush. I got in my car and drove home.